My current D&D campaign is reaching its endgame, and with that comes the opportunity to print and paint the minis for some of our epic villains. This is the Prophet of Death, an archdevil that has haunted the players' stories for many sessions now, and today I'm going to be printing and painting his miniature, in what I think is possibly one of the best prints I have done on the channel to date. Let's jump right in. And the first thing of note was the model I decided to print. See, I had a very particular image in my mind of this archdevil, this large horned humanoid figure with 4 eyes and wings that had been severed, so I took to my mini factory to see what I could find, keeping in mind that I would almost definitely have to make some changes to whatever model I decided to choose. For which I ended up landing on this, the Archdevil Kavaramon by DM Stash. It's most of the way to what I want, and all I'll really have to do is get rid of his wings and swap out that sword. So I spent some time in Blender, using various tools to both remove the wings and change up the pose on his sword arm. Then, in its place, I added a big, over-the-shoulder cloak. Not to go into too many details here, but to give you an idea of the purpose this mini was serving, it was going to be part of a 2-phase encounter, with the second phase of this fight being where the Prophet would toss this cloak from his shoulder and reveal himself to be holding a gleaming golden blade, something that was very front and center to the player's current goals and was deeply tied to one of the PC's backstories. So, after sculpting up both of these arm options, I decided to add some holes for magnets, to allow me to swap his arm mid-encounter, without having to paint 2 full minis. If you would be interested in a more in-depth look at how I go about customizing minis like this, chopping and changing bits, sculpting details, and adding things like magnet holes, drop a comment down below. I'd be more than happy to go more in-depth on this in another video if there's some interest for it. But with this model done, it's time to support the mini and get it ready for printing. If you want to see exactly how I automatically created supports for this model, you can check out this video, which goes into detail on using Blueprint Studio to automatically add resin supports with good settings dialed in for FDM printing. And with these automatic supports applied to the model in under 20 minutes, I booted up a couple of machines to get this guy printed up nice and quick. The A1 with a 0.2mm nozzle for the body, and the AD5X with a 0.25 nozzle for both the cloak and the sword arms. Having spent that time in the last video dialing in these automatic supports and slicing process, these parts printed up fantastic, and support removal was a breeze. The supports themselves just pop right off, and all I really needed to do for cleanup was a once-over with a hobby knife, just to nick off any bumps left behind by the supports. For the base, I used one of my older Patreon releases, which are available over on my mini factory. To this, I added a few extra details. I decided to use some weapons out of my bits box to add some remnants of previous foes that the Prophet has overcome. Some chunks of cork and various sized gravel, as well as some grass tufts to help cement this base in a magma-infused hellscape. And if you like the look of this base, you'll probably also like the current release of monthly bases over on the Painted for Combat Patreon. This month, our STL tier members will get access to the Crystal Caverns, a set of versatile bases that could be painted up in any number of styles, from a dusty, cracked earth to volcanic rock, or, as suggested, a crystal-lined cavern floor. These are designed to print on FDM printers with no supports required, and are sculpted with flat top faces to help eliminate unsightly layer lines. Plus, STL tier members get access to a welcome bundle of printable goodies, including the painting handles you see in all of my miniatures videos. A huge thank you to everyone supporting the channel on Patreon, and a special shout out to the Painted for Display tier members. It really is thanks to everyone getting involved over on the Patreon that I'm able to keep making videos like this, so thank you so much. Alright, let's get back to it. Over my last few minis, I've been working on improving my painting, trying to reach a great looking model in a reasonable amount of hobby time. For me, this has boiled down to keeping my paint jobs cohesive across their various colours, while still pushing to introduce contrast. This starts with an all-over base coat of the most prominent colour, so after a black prime, I wanted to create a rich, warm base coat on the model, ready for our devilish flesh. First, I hit the model with a layer of a dark, saturated purple, which will end up being left in the most recessed areas. Then, I slowly built up a layer of bright red, aiming down on the model from above to try and hit all of the details that would be catching light, just leaving that purple behind on the undersides and in the deepest recesses of the miniature. And after a quick matte varnish to pull down these glossy paints, he was ready for some simple but effective brushwork. Personally, I don't really enjoy the process of base coating. It just takes way too long to get a mini covered with the colours it needs to be, so the fact that over half of this model is already base coated for us using the airbrush with this method is great. And because we've built up those shadow tones, even if I miss a detail in the recesses somewhere in the process, it should still feel relatively cohesive with the paint scheme. And the best part of having these shadows down is that I get to jump straight into some midtones and highlights, working up through a series of bright saturated reds, trying to introduce a rich contrast between our shadows and highlights. While I do this, I make sure to be intentional with my paint strokes, specifically where these colours meet, following the flow of his muscles with my brush, meaning that even if these transitions are a little bit blocky, the eye will blend them together at a distance, helping to sell this as skin. For the leathers, I follow a very similar process. Even though our red base coat is brighter than our brown midtone, I still leave it in the recesses. This helps to keep those colours cohesive across the model and almost makes it look like the red of the skin is being reflected in those shadowed areas. Then I just move through the browns like I did on the skin, but rather than following the form with my brush, I instead hatch in the highlights at a bunch of different angles, selling a more weathered leather look compared to the skin. This change in texture helps it read as a different material, but still keeps a similar level of contrast to the skin, making sure that this model will stand out on the table. From here, the rest of the painting was quite simple. A base coat of metallic speed paint was put over all of the metal details. The speed paint just allows a little of that undercoat to peek through to further push that idea of cohesive colours. Then I simply highlighted that up with a bright silver. And a similar concept was used on the darker panels of the armour, using a black speed paint to darken those areas, while still letting that purple-red show through underneath. And then it was just the final details. The cloak arm got a few layers of orange dry brushing to make it look like a scaled hide of some fire-dwelling creature, and the horns got a similar dry brushing of black. For our skeleton, we started with an off-white base coat, which was washed with a flesh tone speed paint, before being touched up with the original white colour. Meanwhile, the sword got probably the most attention on the whole model, using a series of browns, yellows, and whites, as well as some speed paints, to blend together a high-contrast, bright, radiant sword blade. And then, after hitting the base with a few layers of stone greys, and a thick layer of yellow speed paint onto the magma cracks, the Prophet of Death was ready to hit the table. I am so insanely happy with how this mini turned out. From customizing it specifically to fit into my campaign, to putting to use all of the supporting and printing methods that we've developed in my recent videos, and finally painting this up in under a day using some simple but effective techniques. I'm certain that this mini will make for a very memorable tabletop encounter. And that's all the time that we have for today. So, like if you liked, subscribe for more FDM printing and tabletop videos, but most importantly, thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a good one. Hard to fight in this thing. Tosses it to the side. Bound by iron chain and devilish sigils, these glowing red runes on his shoulder, you can see a skeletal corpse draped over his arm. Its arms reaching down past the prophet's arm, and in the skeletal hands of an Alexander Bellwood, you can see a gleaming golden blade